the classroom here, and we've got some really amazing things happening in Minnesota. So what we ask the teachers to do who are going to speak today is to pre-record about a 5-minute video of what they're working on, just so they could get the most information out in the short amount of time. And so we'll play the video, and then they'll talk. Sarah Damon is going to moderate this session. So Sarah, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, thank you. For some odd reason, I lost my internet right before we started this section, and I missed the first part of your award ceremony, Jim, so I'm so sorry. I was dashing all around the house trying to get things working again, and I'm back, so hopefully that won't happen again. We have invited a group of educators today to share what they're doing in their classroom, in the hopes that this will inspire and also demystify a bit how you can use GIS no matter what you're teaching. It doesn't just have to be geography or science. You can teach anything with GIS. And I think one transition that we should all really think about in our thought process is a transition from teaching about GIS to teaching with GIS. So no matter what you're teaching, you can teach it with GIS. So what we thought we would do is to show each video and then pause after the video for a few minutes of questions. And then with each segment being about 10 minutes. And then at the very end, if we have extra time, to take more questions. But also don't forget, there's the Google Doc that we have going where people can post questions as well. So use the chat or use the Google Doc, or just wait until the pauses between each video and unmute yourself, and we'll take questions verbally at that point. So Stacy's in charge of playing the videos, and I'll let her get started with the first one.
Okay, if you could give me a thumbs up that this is working, that would be great. It's not working yet.
Gina Hollanday, and I would like to welcome you to the 2020 Minnesota GIS.
We're still seeing your desktop.
You're still seeing my desktop. Okay, let's try this again. Are you seeing Gina's?
Consortium.
Yes.
I will be talking to you a little bit about what it's like using GIS in the classroom.
Hear it.
So
We can hear it, Stacy.
I'm a teacher at Denfeld High School, where I teach primarily AP history and CITS courses, specifically psychology, C&C law, and economics. So first, there's some advantages that we probably all understand and relate to in terms of how we can use GIS in the classes or in the schools. Some advantages are when students are exposed to GIS, they kind of enter at the same place. So there's really the same learning curve. It's not like in math where some kids might come in and have more background than the other students. Here we start out all the same. I tend to use it with my AP classes more than I do with any general class. We're thinking about in the future the possibility of partnering for the potential of CITS credits. And particularly, I use ArcGIS Online. The few disadvantages is the lack of funding. However, Esri has certainly brought down the barriers by giving us free ArcGIS Online to use in the classroom. The other disadvantage is there is just not that many state standards that are specifically tied to GIS. However, I tend to make it work with some of the other mapping standards. So in particular today, I would like to talk to you about some cross-curricular projects that either we are working on or that we have already done. Specifically this year, when we have made the move to distance learning because of COVID, I partnered with the biology class, and this is the honors bio for the most part. And what we're working on is some watershed mapping so that the kids can understand how a watershed works. And then they're going to go out to the rivers and do some in situ data collection. Now, what I'm hoping for, and what I've suggested to the biology teacher, is to have the kids download Survey 123 and try to use that so that they can capture pictures as well as their latitude, longitude that we can pull back in and try to map later on. Obviously, with distance learning, we don't have access to the desktop, and so it's going to be a little bit more difficult, however, not impossible for them to be able to work with this data. I'm also looking at, with my CNC law, that civil and criminal law class, about how we can work with the University of Minnesota and Dr. Pine on how Black Lives Matter, the movement, as well as historic and systemic racism, and how the boundaries for neighborhoods tend to follow certain demographics and how that affects our minority populations. And so we're in the early stages of planning, and I'll get back to you and let you know, hopefully next year, what we come up with. If we were in the class right now, it would be fun to have kids in our U.S. history class working on elections, doing some, mapping in terms of where we're at in the polls, and then, of course, some mapping after the results start to come in. Again, I think in APUSH, we've looked at historic and systemic racism and how that looks in the South versus what it looked like in the North, and try to make some comparisons there. And then I've actually used it in my economics class, where we've worked on some site selection for when they get to a part where they kind of have to reinvent or invent a business. Then they pick where they would, the geography of where they would put their site, and then they make story maps in ArcGIS Online to show, to turn in for their projects. I think the direction that I see GIS moving in our school is as a facilitation tool, where student learning is now focused on learning the content while supporting it with the GIS. All right, if you have any questions, let me know. I'm at gina.hollanday@isd709.org. See you later.
All right, and Gina, are you with us live?
I am here.
Okay. If you look in your participant window, there is an opportunity to raise a hand by clicking on the raise hand icon. That would be one way we could manage this. Otherwise, if it works out, you can just jump in and ask Gina any questions you have about what she's doing with GIS.
I don't have a question, but people may not know this, but the first 2 years of the national competition, Gina's students won the national competition for Esri. And she, like everybody else, was starting from ground zero on the competition. So she's done a phenomenal job with her students.
Thank you, Charlie.
I'm seeing in the chat that Leah Cook has a question about a basic template for a story map assignment. And here we have a response.
And I'd love to see if anybody else has templates for stories. Gina, I'm really curious. Can I just ask Gina a quick question of where you're finding the data, especially for the APUSH, looking at the systemic racism aspect where you're
Well, a lot
looking
of
for
times,
data?
yep, a lot of times we have to create our own. So we have to look back over history to see what we're looking for, looking for data sets and building them ourselves. And sometimes what I do is I use the desktop and build things that we can later pull in, or that I host and that the kids bring in themselves. There's a lot of great resources with Esri, where they do have Esri education kind of models already built. I haven't personally used them in the classroom, but I know I've seen them at a couple conventions, and it definitely looks like, some very canned software that you can pretty much open and run with it and let the kids look for places and compare data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gina, this is Charlie. I've got a question for you in terms of if there are other schools, or sorry, other teachers in the school that are working with GIS.
That is an awesome question. Not nearly as many as I would like. This year, Allison Wood, who is on our science department, she seems to be very excited about what we can do moving forward. I think part of this is because of the situation we're in with distance learning, it's giving teachers an opportunity to reimagine what our class could be. And so I think the reason we haven't had more teachers using it until this point is that we, as teachers, sometimes get in a routine of doing what we always did. And this distance learning has forced us to look for new lessons and new opportunities to engage the students. And so I think we're going to see more interest in GIS, kind of like, I think I mentioned it, but not in terms of teaching GIS, but in starting to use GIS in our teaching.
All right, thank you so much, Gina. I think we need to move on to the next video. And remember, if you have additional questions for Gina, just put them in the chat or add them to the Google Doc.
Hello, I'm Tracy Anderson, Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension 4-H Youth Development.
Can't see it
I'm
yet.
in Two Harbors, Minnesota, and work primarily with Lake County 4-H. 4-H is a program.
Same problem as last time, Stace.
Yep.
That we've offered in the summer with Lake County 4-H, and it's for young people grades 6 through 10. My Extension Educator colleague, Rebecca Meyer, and I have been working on a program called 4-H Water Watchers for the last 4 years. 4-H Water Watchers Conservation Club provides young people with an opportunity for learning that is focused on citizen science, invasive species, natural resources, and general conservation content through weekly learning experiences. Summer of 2020 was year 4 of Water Watchers. The first 3 years we did fully face-to-face. We met in person once a week for 6 weeks and went out to green spaces and explored our natural resources and invasive species through citizen science projects. This year, when we learned that face-to-face was not a viable option, we pivoted and turned it virtual. And we met by Zoom once a week for 6 weeks with the young people. And then in between those meetings, we offered a challenge for the young people to go out and observe, make observations in the natural resources and green spaces of their choice. For observing or for recording their observations, we use Survey 123 and story maps. And so today I'll be sharing how we use those two in our programming. So we're going to bump out here. And, okay. And so this is the Survey 123 that we used. So we just had a title and then kind of a little descriptor of what we wanted them to do, first name, date, time, what they observed, photographs, up to 4 photographs of what they observed, just description of what they observed, where they made that observation, what's the pinpointed spot that they made that observation. This was key for our map later. And then I wonder, this week I wonder this about the observation that I made. So I really like Survey 123. It was a great tool. And some of the other pieces I like were being able to look at the data in a couple of different ways. When we met with the young people, once we got together each week, we would go through all of it and let them see what their fellow water watchers also observed. And here's just another way to look at that data and look at what the young people put in for their observations. Then we took all of that and for our ending kind of final project, we made a story map. And so we did a story map of those observations. A little fun fact about our Survey 123 and story maps is that 2 years ago at GIS Educator Day is where I first learned about these platforms. And so I've been waiting for just the right opportunity to use them. So I'm really excited that we were able to do that this summer. So here's our story map, and the little eye up here, you can kind of click on it and it tells the name of what's in the picture, and then just did a photo credit, because each of the pictures of this story map were taken by the young people that participated in the Water Watchers program. And when we were putting this together, I first went through the pictures and kind of pulled out some pictures that I thought would be good to use. And then I realized that that really isn't youth voice, and that I really needed to go back to the young people that took those pictures and made those observations and find out from them what they wanted to take and use in our story maps. So all the pictures here are ones that they chose. They weren't always the ones that I picked, but I'm glad that I asked them, because they really made great choices. So we kind of go through here. It's the title, the young people that participated, when it was, and then again another picture from a young person, and then it just kind of overview of what we were doing, a map. And I really like how they embed the map in here. You can expand it and then click on one of the observations, and then this cute little box pops up, and then it shows you that whole observation. So this is Raina's observation, and it goes through all of her answers to our observations. The other piece I like that I think is really great is up here, it shows 1 of 11. So Raina made 11 observations during our 6 weeks together. And so you can just click through each of her observations, which is pretty neat. So if we bump back down and then continue on, so that was the map. And then we just kind of went through, what we did each week. So week 1, we answered these questions, and we also talked about the scientific process and what that entails. And then at the end, we talked about here, where we did the survey 1, 2, 3 and the I Wonder, and then just goes from there. What we did week 2, week 3, who our speakers were, what our topics were, and so on and so forth through the whole story map. This is a publication that we gave to each young person to aid in their identification of their observations. And then just our partners, program facilitators, and then our partners that we worked with on this program. So that, in a nutshell, is how we use Survey 1, 2, 3 and story maps in our 4-H program this summer. Thanks.
All right, great. Thanks, Tracy. Any quick questions for her?
Is it available to look at closer?
Yeah, I can provide the link for it. I do have a link to both of the survey isn't live right now. I could probably make it live again or just for viewing, but the story map for sure. Are you interested in one versus the other, or?
The story map.
Let me see if I can. Yeah, I can. I'll try to put it in the chat before we're done today.
Great, thank you.
Can I ask a question? Tracy,
Yes.
This is Stacy. I'm wondering what the students that you worked with, if they asked about other applications of GIS, or kind of what their reactions were to mapping.
They didn't. We really just met once a week for those 6 weeks. So I feel like our interaction, as you know, that hour can go really fast. So we didn't delve into it a lot. They all were really, did a great job of using it. They didn't seem to have any trouble. They always found it really interesting. Each week when we met, we would go back through what they had found. But that's actually one of the things going forward that I'm hoping to do. Like I had mentioned, the first 3 years, we were fully face-to-face all day, once a week, and then we went to the 1 hour. So that's, I'm hoping in future, now that we've done this, to kind of have that back where we have the face-to-face person to person with young people, and then show them more about what's available, and then get them more involved in the creating and working with it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much. Let's move on now to the next video.
My name is Molly Bosu. I'm an AP Human Geography teacher at Burnsville High School in Burnsville, Minnesota. And today I'm just going to talk about a few ways in which I use ArcGIS in my classroom. So one of the things I do pretty early on to get my students more comfortable with using ArcGIS are the geo inquiries. And so the geo inquiries are those pre-made lessons that students can use in different content areas. And then one of the great things about this is it does follow the content pretty clearly, but it also asks students pretty high level thinking questions. And it gets them to do many different things on ArcGIS map. So I use the human geography ones, and there's many different ones right here. The other thing that I did this year is I created my own geo inquiry. So I found that the concept for students of states and nations and the configuration of states and nations was oftentimes pretty confusing for them. And I thought that it would just be better for them to be able to see it on a map. And so this is the one that I created, and you can see the map that I created here. This is an example of Germany. And so the state of Germany right here versus the nation of Germany, and how those two things don't necessarily overlap very well on a map. And I did that with a number of other key terms as well. And so that was just helpful for them to be able to see that on a map. The other, I guess the bigger thing that I do with my students for ArcGIS, something that I started last year, was have them create their own maps. And so the purpose of this was to take some aspect of human geography, apply it to Minnesota, and then get the students to really think of those geographic questions and get them to ask those geographic questions and those spatial questions. And then figure out how would I take a topic of my choice and what types of decisions would I make if I were going to map that, if I were going to tell the story of my topic. And so what I was really looking for them to do is to analyze patterns on a map, but also just make those geographic decisions. And so I'm going to show you a couple of the examples of student work. So this first one right here, the student was looking at poverty in Dakota and Ramsey County, and they were looking at mapping out poverty, but also the different education levels, and to see if there was any correlation between those two. This group of students took a look at the Great Northern Railroad, and they were interested in this historic Great Northern Depot and how that led to transportation routes since then. And so they were taking a look at transportation routes, railways, highways, and then location of things like the airport and how those kind of all intersect in the history of transportation. This next one also took a look at transportation a little bit, and was particularly looking at airports in the Twin Cities area and where those airports would get their fuel, and then also how those link to other transportation routes. And then these groups of students were taking a look at segregation in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and then how those, you can see here, they had a map, a 1934 map of redlined areas. And so they were taking a look at different regions that were mapped out as redlined areas, and green-lined areas and other areas, and then how that relates today to segregation that we still experience in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So all of those, I had all of my students create a map, and it was kind of this semester-long project. And then for second semester, I gave some of my students the opportunity to work with their map and to create an entry for the Minnesota mapping project or mapping contest. And so I did have a student this year who decided to do that, and she took her map, which was about achievement disparity, racial achievement disparity in Minnesota, and she created her own layers. She found some data from the MDE, or she got some data from MDE and created a couple layers on her map to show regions of achievement disparity, particularly between white and African American students. And she put her story into obviously the map, but also into writing in the story map, and she entered it into the Minnesota on the Map contest. So these are just a few ways that I use ArcGIS to really get my students to think more spatially and for them really to just see geography in the real world.
All right, some great examples from human geography. Questions for Molly?
I have a question for you. I love the idea of having kids come up with their own maps and questions. I'm just curious, now I have a shorter class, I only have one trimester, but how do you get kids to come up with those topics? Because I would guess that you'll have students that are like, I don't know, you know?
Yeah.
How do you had a wide range of topics, so how do you get them to like focus in on something?
Yep. It's interesting because I did it pretty early on in our content area. And so my class is a full year long class, but we did it pretty early on in the year. And I really just kind of, I think I gave them, here's our different content, here's our different units for human geography, here's some of the things we're gonna be learning about. So like start thinking about these broad categories. And then I gave them like several assignments. So just kind of like a brainstorming assignment, and then they started to narrow their topic. And then when they started to actually like look for layers and that type of stuff, it kind of started to help them narrow their topic. We did like agriculture pretty early on last year, and I had like a disproportionate amount of agriculture projects just because it was something that like we had already talked about. And so, yeah, I guess if we were to do it later in the year, I think they would have had more of the content knowledge. So yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It was definitely took some brainstorming. Yeah. And then also seeing what other people chose and kind of going off of that. This year I'm thinking about, so because I teach AP Human Geography and because this year has been crazy already and we've started school late and the test is pretty early, I'm actually thinking about doing a project for the month after the AP exam. And that wouldn't really align with the Minnesota mapping project because that's usually due at the beginning of May. But we have like nearly a month after the AP exam of school left, actually over a month. And so I'm thinking like, we don't have anything left to do at the end. And I know I talked to like Jim a little bit about this at one point, but trying to put together some sort of project that we could like even share with other AP Human Geography teachers and say like, here's like a month-long like mapping project that you can just do, and we could, that would be the last month of school. They wouldn't be done in time to submit them to the contest, which would be unfortunate, but if we had some good ones, we could always submit them next year.
Okay, great. Thanks, Molly. One idea also is to reach out to your community and to see which organizations would like something mapped and to add that kind of element of service learning for students. So if maybe the students can't think of a topic, but there are plenty of other people in the community that have some things that they would really like to see mapped. And now with all the great options with story maps and things, they can use the student products on their websites, and so you can help get ideas from other people. All right, great. Thanks, Molly. We need to move on to the next video. So Stacy, if you could cue that up.
Hello, we are here to tell you about some of the ways that we use geospatial technologies in our classroom. So first off, who are we? My name is Brittany Wedland, and I teach at Big Lake High School in Big Lake, Minnesota.
And I'm Alyssa Larson, and I teach at Waconia High School in Waconia, Minnesota.
So obviously we're both teaching in the metro area, and if it looks like you're seeing double, you are. We are twins, and so we both teach the same subjects in 2 different metro schools. And so we have been working on implementing our standards-based inquiry lessons for many years, and just been incorporating more and more geospatial skills and tools as we've been learning about them.
So our goal today is to kind of just share with you some projects that we've had some success with and hopefully inspire you to do the same. So our first project is probably the one that we've been working on the longest. It's called the City Planning Project, and students use ArcGIS and follow the geographic inquiry process and be able to determine a business that they feel would be successful in their community. And so that's what we love about it, is it's very applicable to what students are doing right now. The way that it works is it has several parts to it, but each part does incorporate, like we said, those geospatial skills. The first part is they explore different layers, and then they actually use the data from those layers to be able to argue why their city should allow them to open whatever business that they want. A lot of students do restaurants, but sometimes we have others as well. And then the project culminates in an argumentative essay to City Council. So just to give you an idea of what this can look like, most cities have zoning maps within ArcGIS. So for example, the city of Waconia has their maps that students can use and be able to add and save their own maps, but sometimes you have to kind of do a little bit of background searching in order to get that accomplished. Britt, do you want to tell a little bit about that for Big Lake?
Yeah, so while this is loading, so I had to work with the city planner of Big Lake, but they were super eager. I just sent a quick email, using the city webpage, and then they were able to give me the file to easily upload. But a lot of times, like Waconia's was just right in there. And so then what we have happen is kids will pull up the zoning map, and then we teach them with some previous lessons that we actually got from people on this GIS panel, kind of how to use the tools, and then that way they can implement it. So Alyssa, if you want to take it back and kind of explain a little bit more.
So the cool thing about these maps is then we can also be able to explain to students how businesses actually able to decide where they want to build. And so in the case of Waconia, they have layers that not only show the current zoning, but also future projections. And that is also kind of interesting for students to see, like, for example, this area here isn't developed yet, but they're planning on doing that. And so students not only have to choose the area that they want to develop, but then they analyze different data layers to kind of further encourage the city and show why it's going to be successful. So it really does take that higher level thinking to show why does this data matter. And so we laid it all out in a step-by-step process, and we actually have them do screenshots and things like that just to kind of make sure that they know what layer they're using, and just a way to kind of keep things organized.
Yeah, and then one of the other projects, as we've been dealing with this unprecedented time, is we've been always teaching, or at least for the past few years, teaching that geo-inquiry cycle. And so last spring when we were at home doing distance learning, I created this simple project which used the ArcGIS COVID-19 data that you saw in the news, and they did a little analysis of it. So what they did, if you want to, yep, there you go. So what they did is they looked at this Johns Hopkins, data sheet, and I had them take a look at the background of the map, and basically there was this blank template that they then could just use in order to follow the steps. And so you can see down at the bottom of the screen, they had to generate some geographic questions, and then they had to explore the data, both just from the map right in front of them, but then also using the data that, is behind the map to then make conclusions about why things are happening and what they think should happen. So just really following that geo-inquiry cycle that we've been wanting them to do, and how applicable. I mean, this is something that they're dealing with in their life. So then here you can see, this is just some examples of some student work, and a little quote there at the top of just a student that found this very meaningful. We found that students said that it was something that they could easily, apply to their lives, and it was something that made this information that they saw passing by on the news, like, oh, this is where they're getting in the information, and talk about making ArcGIS relevant. They saw that this wasn't just something that their teachers were talking at them, telling them they should use it. It's real world stuff that is being used by professionals all the time.
definitely. So one last project we wanted to show you is a little bit different because we're not just looking at specific data. We're going to kind of allow a lot of student choice. And so this is the mapping the story of a culture. And this also uses the Esri product story maps that I know another teacher is going to expand upon in the panel discussion. But we wanted to show you how we utilize it. So one of the standards in our course is obviously learning about culture. And so what students do here is they have, once again, an organizational Google document that they do some preliminary research on demographics, but we actually have them use ArcGIS layers as a starting point to kind of learn about population and climate and things like that before moving on to step 2, where they actually can look up specific information about their country and to go into more specific details about norms and folkways, taboos, things like that. But then what we love about this is the story map kind of puts it all together. And so in this project, we get to use the skills that they learned about in Unit 1 with all those geospatial skills, and then continue to utilize it in what we use as Unit 2. So I'm just going to show you an example here, just to kind of show you how there's a lot of different ways that students can be creative with this project. I especially love the updated version of this program because it, like I said, it really allows a lot of students' creativity. This is an example on the country of Nepal. And so students can put pictures here or videos, but then what I love as well is that it can embed these ArcGIS maps that they have used previously. And so it's going to take a little bit to load, but again, students can modify them to add major cities or other data points. And like I said, anything from population to climate, and then they can go on and add other media and images and whatnot. And this is really easy to modify for different levels because you can obviously require different parts and steps based on student need. And then what we also love about it is it's really easy then for students to share this with their classmates. And especially now when we have students that are in school and at home, this is really great because students can learn from these, whether they're in the classroom or at home on their own device. So really fun projects, and I'm actually introducing it with my current students next week.
So, and we keep modifying and changing things as there are changes to ArcGIS and it becomes even more user-friendly. And these are just a sampling. We're people that love to connect. So if you are interested in learning more about how we use it, or you want to just collaborate, reach out to us via email or Twitter or whatever, and we'll be looking forward to working with you. So thanks for watching and have a great day.
All right, wow. Lots of people loving your ideas in the chat and wanting to access your lessons. So maybe Alyssa or Brittany, if you could let us know how people can get a hold of those things.
Yeah, we can throw some links in that document, and then yeah, we have a website. We forgot about it because we were so busy with COVID stuff. So we need to get that re-up and running again. But we have a website, Twins Who Teach. So we'll try to get that up and running maybe later on today again. And then you guys can get those lessons there. But we'll throw our emails in that document for sure. So that way, if there's like one that you want sooner rather than later, then you can let us know, and we can try to get that out to you. So, yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to post the link to the Google Doc again in the chat. So this is, if anyone's just joining us, this is just a parking lot for different questions and resources over the day. So feel free to use that. Molly, did you have a question? Not sure what I'm looking at. Stacy, is that your screen?
I haven't shared my screen yet.
Ah, okay, because it had Molly's name in large. Didn't know if Molly was wanting to speak or what was going on.
Are you talking about me, Molly? Molly Bosu?
Yes, you, Molly.
Oh, no, I didn't have
okay.
No,
I think
I
it's
did have a
'cause-
question.
I think it's because you're, yeah, not sure. I'm seeing your name again now too. All right, so I think we have one more video to take a look at, and then we can take any remaining questions before we break for lunch.
All right, I'm just gonna do a quick intro here, Cindy, and you can chime in too. But Cindy has some great student testimonials on her video, and it actually went longer than we have time for. So I was just gonna show like your introduction for the first like minute and a half, and then maybe you can just talk about some of your students, or I don't know if some of your students are actually here to say a few words. But for those of you, this video is posted on that YouTube link, so you can watch the students, but her students have gone on to do some great things. So let's watch the intro part here.
Hi, my name is Cindy Welsh. I am a 7th grade life science teacher at Cloquet Middle School, and I help high school kids do science research. I've been doing that for 20 years. I started using ArcGIS Online when it came out. I think I've gone to 4 conferences. I've had 4 student projects that have done story maps. One of them won a first place in the state, and then the year before 10th place in the state. Another one won 2nd place in the state, and the year before was 7th place. And one of my middle school students was in the top 5 this year. I start with a science research project in 7th grade, and then I help kids who want to do it outside of class do it in 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. And really, my expertise in GIS is not that great. My students, especially I have one, Marcy, who we didn't know what we were doing at all. We used geo mentors. Some of our mentors are past students, like Courtney that you're going to see in this film, who has a double master's degree and in GIS and is mentoring some of my students. And they start helping them, and pretty soon Marcy knows more than I do at all. They know ArcGIS and they figure it out. And I just help them, and I get them geo mentors, and I know how to put projects together. So anyway, I'm going to have a few of them talk, because as teachers, we know we like to hear kids talk. So the rest of the video is going to be about them and their GIS and research journey. Thanks for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Courtney Jackson.
Sorry, I really hate to do that, Cindy. Do you have, can you summarize some things about your students?
Yeah, I'll tell you a little bit about Courtney. Actually, the interesting story about Courtney is that she started doing mapping when there was no GIS. She was way back in like 2008. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I have a new Bluetooth thing in it, and I didn't know. This is the first time I've used it. So anyway, she started using Adobe Illustrator, where you could put layers in there and draw on it, and she was mapping Venus. And then she just continued mapping, and like I said, one really cool thing is she got to go to the first White House Science Fair with her mapping project. And now she has a double master's degree in it, and is working for the U.S. Census Bureau. So, but I did bring one of the things that Sarah mentioned was how you need to look in the community where there's data that other people, want to share. And Mike Schrag is here. He's from the Fond du Lac Tribal Conservation. I always say the organization wrong. He's for the Fond du Lac tribe. He's a wildlife biologist. Mike, could you just talk for like a minute or a little bit about the data that you have and how my students have been helping you? Hopefully he's still here. Mike, are you still? Mike, can you unmute yourself and say a few words? He's here.
See him.
Maybe he left for a couple minutes. Oh,
there he is.
Okay.
How about that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Can't
Okay.
see you, but we can
Sorry.
hear you.
Yeah, no, it's the technology here at my office and the Wi-Fi connection is a bit limited, but I can see you. Yeah, so I started. Cindy and I have known each other for a number of years, and I've been involved with her science fair competitions. And somewhere a few years ago, I forget if she came to me or I went to her, but I'm tracking a number of wolves on the reservation for my own research purposes. They all are wearing satellite tracking collars and provide location data at intervals. So I worked out with Cindy to where if she has students interested in studying wolves, I'm providing location data, and she's had 2 students now, Marcy Ferrier and Grace Levon, who have been taking that location data and plugging it into science fair projects and looking at different aspects of wolf habitat use, wolf movements, den locations, things like that.
Thanks, Mike. Grace, would you just unmute and just talk a little bit about what your project was about?
Yeah, so I used information that I got from Mike to track wolves in Minnesota to see if they moved more in a certain season. And I found out that they moved the most in the spring and the winter. I am going to continue working with GIS through high school, and it's been a lot of fun. It was a lot to learn at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's not quite as hard anymore.
And you've had to rely a lot on geo-mentors like Jim. Twice, I think Jim's been on a meet or a Zoom with us, helping both of us figure something out. And she has another geo-mentor, Sam, who is at our St. Louis County GIS person. And we really couldn't do it without them because we run into roadblocks and then we need help. And Peyton, Peyton is in this program at the University of Minnesota where there was 10 people who, as a freshman, got admitted to the U of M, and they go directly into med school when they're done. And her project was, one year was on ozone. And Peyton, I think she might still be there. She's a busy woman going to this pre-med stuff, but are you there, Peyton?
Yeah, I am.
Can we see you? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah. So back in high school, I studied ground level ozone, and I started looking at how different weather parameters impact ozone levels across Minnesota. And then later on, I started to incorporate ArcGIS, and I used ArcGIS to create different land cover maps. So I looked at different types of land cover and water, and if that impacted ozone levels across the state. And I think using ArcGIS for me just really helped open my eyes to how important it is to be able to visualize your data, especially when you're talking about, like I was studying ozone, which, you're only really referring to it, as in parts per million. You don't see it really. So it was interesting to be able to visualize that, and, those skills that I learned just, having to problem solve through ArcGIS. And I use story maps right now. I'm using it to give a presentation in one of my classes down here at the U. So I've learned a lot of really interesting things through ArcGIS and just, science fair in general. And Dr. Welsh was able to connect me with different geo-mentors, and they were a huge help in learning ArcGIS. So yeah, that's a little bit about what I studied and how I used ArcGIS.
So does anybody have any questions? I don't know if our time is up, just for any of the people who have spoken or for myself.
I don't have a question, but I posted it. Grace's project is on the 2020 competition results map, and I believe Peyton's, it's Peyton, is that correct?
Yep.
Is on the 2019, and I think there is a link to that on Esri's results for the national competition, if anybody's interesting. If you haven't looked at the maps, the data that they're able to map, tracing where the wolves have been, it kind of like blows your mind when you actually see it on a map.
Great. Thanks so much also to the students and former students for joining us today. We have a few minutes left. Let's see, it's 12:34. And we're here till 12:45. So we can open it up to any questions that anyone has about any of the videos or anything else that you think is relevant at this point.
I've got a question that I'll jump in and ask, that I've been impressed by the number of people who mentioned something about a mentor. I would like to know from the people who are here, if you would just indicate with a raised hand in the participant window if you have somebody that you rely on in terms of helping you out on a formal or informal basis as a mentor to solve problems for you on doing GIS things. Can you indicate that in your in either the participant window or turn on your camera and raise a hand or something? So there's definite yeses here. It's actually, this is a thing that I think is a real key in making a breakthrough between being stuck and going at full speed. So I just want to encourage people, if you get stuck, find somebody.
Thanks so much for that question, Charlie. And I just want to take this opportunity to remind you that at the bottom of that landing page, we have a form to fill out if you are looking for somebody to support you in any way. This could be small or medium or large. And also if you are a teacher who is willing to talk with another teacher. And the reason we've done these forms like this in Minnesota versus that there is a national way to do this as well, but I can take a look at that and try to match people up by location, which doesn't even really matter as much now, but going forward, that's kind of nice if you're geographically close to one another, and introduce you to one another. So anyway, I don't want to take any more time, but that is something that we want to promote in Minnesota. So thanks.
Okay, other questions for any of our teachers?
Tracy posted the story map for the 4-H project in the chat.
Yeah, great. Well, then I will ask the teachers a question, teachers that presented videos today. If there were to be just one recommended resource that you would have for people in terms of just getting started or moving forward a little bit further with GIS in the classroom, what would you recommend?
I mentioned this earlier in the chat, but when I first learned about this, well, Alyssa and I both did, when we saw Sarah present at a MAGE conference. And so we were literally, I didn't even know what GIS, we were just mind blown. Like, I felt embarrassed because our standards talked about GIS and I had no idea what it was. So then when you presented, you not only showed some of the video clips and things that you just kind of showed the students what it was. So you did so I incorporated that right away. And then also the ArcGIS 3x3, it's just like step by step for students who had never seen it before. So I think that even for me as a teacher going through it, because I think you had us go through it and just do the 3x3 at the end of that session. So if you've never even opened ArcGIS before, because it's super overwhelming at first, you know, it's even overwhelming to me now and I use it. But yeah, so like after I did going through those, then you just kind of get more confident with it. So I think Alyssa posted a link to like the introduction to GIS PowerPoint that we use, or the Google Slides. And a lot of it is stuff that we stole from Sarah. But it's not stealing in education, right?
Okay, and you can find that in the Google Doc.
Yep.
Correct? Great. Other teachers? Recommended resource to get started or go further?
I would say the geo inquiries for sure. If you are not using those yet, taking a look at those. I think sometimes it can be hard to just be like, oh, we're just going to take like a day or a week to learn ArcGIS, because there's also content that we are teaching. So those are doing both. Like the kids are using ArcGIS, they don't have to have an account, but it's also helping them learn the content too. So it kind of is, you know, it feels like it's still part of your, you know, you're still teaching as well as the learning the simple skills.
Thanks, Molly. Other suggestions for resources, getting started or taking things to the next level?
I would say that there's often other teachers in your area that have put together a nice little unit on how to get started with GIS, and often are very willing to share that. So it's just something to, you know, maybe put the word out a little bit. I mean, for me, I'm starting to use it in my classroom. We're starting to use Survey 123 to look at our forest. And so I think that just finding another teacher who has something put together might also be helpful.
I would recommend that Lori Bond, who teaches at Olson Middle School, made a video, and she kind of talks in her presentation about how she scaffolds kids into ArcGIS. She's incorporating it into her regular classwork, but she's also easing them into ArcGIS as she does it. So I would recommend watching that video. It may give you some good ideas on how to approach it, so it's integrated into what you're teaching, as well as not trying to overload the kids with too much GIS technology right away.
Thanks, Jim. All right, anybody else? We've got 3 minutes. Suggestions for getting started or going further? All right, Stacy, do you want to talk a little bit about this afternoon and just give people a little